My name is Catherine. I'm 34 years old, and I've been staying with my mom at our family house ever since my dad died 3 years ago. I decided to stay because I didn't want to leave my mom alone. So I've been here for 3 years now. During this time, some really bad people came to see us. These people were my own brother, Bob, and his wife Jane. I've known Bob since he was born, and Jane has been his girlfriend since they were in middle school. Bob used to bring Jane home during vacations, so I got to know her too. To be honest, I can't forget about those two. They used to bully me just for fun. Both of my parents were usually busy with work, so they weren't around much on weekends. But when they were gone, that's when the bad stuff happened. We lived in a big mansion that my dad, who was a CEO, built for us. But one time, they told me to play hide and seek in the mansion, and when I hid in a closet, my brother and Jane filled it with stuff, trapping me inside. I'd be stuck in there until just before my parents came home, and then my mom would scold me for messing up the closet. One day, my mom came home early from work and caught Bob and Jane stuffing me in the closet and blocking the door. She was really mad. After that, they never locked me in the closet again, but they kept bothering me. I was angry at my parents for not being there when I needed them. I resented Bob and Jane, but I also felt mad at my parents for not helping me. Then, when I was in middle school, Bob and Jane did something really mean. They cut up my school uniform with scissors, wrote all over my textbooks, and even ruined my cushions and bedding. I found out later that Bob and Jane were in high school at the time, and they were angry because they got bad grades on their exams and their parents scolded them. That's probably why they took such a mean revenge on me. I was shocked in my messed up room. Why was this happening to me? Why wouldn't anyone help me? I stood there lost in those thoughts. Then, when I didn't come to dinner, my mom came to check on me and saw my room. She screamed, and my dad came running too. My brother came in last, struggling to hold back his laughter. He couldn't help but chuckle sometimes. Surprised, my parents looked at me as I said, "Mom, Dad, I want to leave this house." Tears started flowing as soon as I spoke. No one is helping me. Bob and Jane are always mean to me together. They've ruined my toys, my school stuff, and my clothes. I don't want to live here anymore. I'm mad at both of you, Dad and Mom. You haven't helped me. It was probably the first time I cried so much in front of my family. Before that, I just quietly endured and cried alone when things were tough. But this time I cried loudly like a child. Seeing me like that, my mom hugged me and said, "I'm sorry for everything." Even my brother, after seeing how upset I was, seemed to understand how serious it was. He tried to leave, but my dad stopped him. "Do you understand what you've done? This is serious," my father said. Even though he wasn't yelling, his voice was scary, even to me, who wasn't being scolded. "Come on, Dad. It's not like we committed a crime. We were just having some fun," my brother replied. "Destruction of property is a crime. You need to understand that you have to make up for it," my father explained. But Catherine is family, and I'm still young. Minors can't be criminals, can they? My brother protested. My father sighed deeply at my brother's excuse. True, as a minor, you might not have the means to pay. But as parents, we're responsible for your actions. If you can't compensate, we'll have to. It's time for you to go live with your uncle. Uncle? My father's younger brother was known for being strict and disliked dishonesty. He was like a scary figure to the neighborhood kids, similar to a boogeyman. While he was nice to well-behaved children like me, he had no patience for troublemakers like my brother, Bob, and Jane. Bob never got along with him. "No, I don't want to live with Uncle. I promise I'll behave better," my brother begged. "I've heard that promise too many times. When you and Jane locked Catherine in the closet, when you two chased her around, when you threw bugs at her even though you knew she was scared, every time we found out, we scolded you and you always promised to stop. But you kept doing it anyway. We can't have someone in our home who hurts our family, even if they're family themselves. You're not welcome here anymore," my father declared. After my father's declaration, he grabbed Bob by the neck and took him away. Later on, I learned that my parents were really upset with Bob's behavior. Even after being scolded, Bob didn't seem to get why he was in trouble. He just kept bothering me. I figured he was beyond help. Some people just don't understand how to behave in society. I learned that from watching Bob and Jane. Originally, Bob planned to go to university using our father's money after high school. But our father didn't think he'd do well there. He said, You'll just cause trouble for others. So Bob ended up working at our uncle's company right after high school, but he seemed desperate to leave. As soon as he graduated, he and Jane rented an apartment together. They decided to live together without any help from our parents or uncle for rent or expenses. Later on, Bob asked me to lend him some money, even though I was just starting high school and didn't have a job. All the money I had saved up before, which Bob used to steal when he lived with us, was given back to me by my parents. I kept track of it in a notebook. So, I did have money saved, but I wasn't going to give it to him. I told Bob, "Aren't you embarrassed to ask your high school sister for money? I don't even have a job, so I don't have extra money to give you." After that, I told my parents about Bob's request, and they were angry. They'd promised not to help him anymore. I thought Bob and Jane should learn to live on their own without relying on others. From then on, I focused on my studies. I worked hard and went to college. After graduating, I got a job and continued learning new things. I was so busy with my own life that I forgot all about Bob. As I had forgotten about him, an invitation to Bob's wedding arrived at our house. The bride was Jane, of course, his partner. So they're finally tying the knot. I thought as my parents and I discussed whether we should go to the wedding of a family member. However, a few days before the wedding, my father collapsed and was taken away by an ambulance. He had always been frail, but this was the first time he had collapsed, so my mother and I panicked and called for help. During this crisis, I reached out to my brother, but he brushed me off, saying, "I'm getting married soon. Don't bother me during this important time." Even when I told him our father was urgently hospitalized, he dismissed it, saying, "He just tripped, right? Make sure you come to my wedding." Then he hung up. Sadly, our father passed away shortly after. With the funeral arrangements underway, my mother and I informed my brother that we couldn't attend his wedding. Despite his insistence that we should be there, my mother and I decided not to go. We also let Jane's parents know about our father's passing and our inability to attend. While Jane's parents understood, my brother and Jane accused us of disrespect for not attending. The message my mother and I received on our voicemail accusing us of rudeness was so absurd that it made me wonder who the real rude person was. While we were focused on arranging our father's funeral, my brother and Jane went ahead with their wedding without considering our loss. After that, my mother and I never brought it up, but we felt like our relationship with my brother was completely broken. Then, out of nowhere, my brother showed up at our door. When I answered the intercom and he said he had a delivery, I wasn't expecting him to be there in person. When I opened the door, there he was, along with Jane, carrying large suitcases. They'd pushed past me and barged into the house. "Hey, hold on, what's going on?" I protested. It seemed like my brother had forgotten our father's words, who had told him never to come back to our house. Despite that, they both barged in, dropped their luggage in the hallway, and started talking nonsense to me. "You and Mom need to leave this house right now," my brother demanded. "What? Mom has dementia, remember?" I was stunned. What was my brother talking about? It had been 3 years since our father passed away, and he hadn't apologized, visited the grave, or done anything to make amends. And now, he was asking for our family mansion. On top of that, he was assuming our mother had dementia and planning to kick her out. I was left speechless. Then our mother appeared from a room in the back. "Catherine, what's happening?" As she saw my brother, she said something shocking. "Oh, who are you?" "If you're a stranger, please leave," she said. My brother and Jane laughed at her. "See, this happens every time we see her. Her dementia must be getting worse. You take care of Mom. I'll take the mansion. I'm the oldest son, so I should get it," my brother declared as he walked further into the house. Jane, copying my brother, turned to me and our mother and said, "Take the old lady and go. I never want to see you again." I hurried to my mother's side and asked, "Mom, are you all right?" We felt like we were being pushed out, so we left the mansion, leaving all the old furniture behind. My mother and I gathered our things and left the house. Luckily, a friend of mine who heard about our situation offered us his house. He was overseas and couldn't take care of it himself. Originally, his cousin looked after the house, but since he's moving to another state next year, it seemed like a good opportunity for us. When we arrived at the house and unpacked, my mother and I finally felt relieved. Then my mother chuckled and said, "We've left that house, but I still don't like how Bob and Jane behave. Maybe we should sell the house," she suggested. I asked my mother about what Bob said regarding her having dementia. She explained, "That's just a story they made up. About 2 years ago they started asking me for money all the time, but they didn't even attend their father's funeral. And they never bothered to check on me afterward." I couldn't believe their audacity to ask for money after all they'd done, so every time they asked, I pretended not to know them and said, "Who? I don't know you. You're a stranger to me, right?" "Oh, I understand now," I remarked. It seemed Bob and Jane misinterpreted my mother's deliberate distance and treated her like a stranger because she wanted nothing to do with them anymore. They thought her indifference meant she genuinely didn't remember them, leading them to believe she had dementia. Regardless, I believe it was wrong to kick someone out of their home, especially if they thought they had dementia. My mother quickly decided to sell the mansion. We'd have been discussing selling it ever since my father passed away, as it was too big for just the two of us. At that time, an executive from my father's company, where I was being trained as a successor, expressed interest in buying it. So the buyer was almost certain. We just needed to go through the paperwork. When I spoke to a real estate contact and explained the situation to the executive, they agreed that leaving the mansion with Bob and Jane would lead to serious problems. It was clear that action needed to be taken swiftly. A week later, our phones wouldn't stop ringing. Bob called my mother while Jane called me repeatedly. They probably wanted to tell us the same thing, but we found it amusing and decided to ignore them for 30 minutes and just enjoy our tea. As we chatted, an hour passed without us realizing it, and it seemed like Bob and Jane had been trying to reach us the whole time. When I finally answered Jane's call, she exclaimed, "Finally. Why didn't you answer sooner? There's a big problem. The house has been taken over." "Wait, didn't you two take over the house?" "I think it says who should be saying that we've been taken over," I retorted. "No, Bob and I were living in this mansion, but now some strangers have shown up and are demanding that we leave. They just barged in and are trying to kick us out. Our mansion has been taken over," she exclaimed. I couldn't help but burst out laughing. I really wanted to remind her that they were the ones who invaded the house in the first place and were unlawfully occupying it. Chuckling a bit, I replied, "You're talking about being taken over, but you're not even the legal owners. My mother, who was the rightful owner, has sold the house to someone else. So strangers who have no connection to the property should quickly move out." "What? She sold it? This mansion?" She sounded shocked. "But this mansion belongs to Bob," she protested. "When did anyone ever say that?" I questioned. "Well, no one explicitly said it, but Bob is the eldest son. Isn't it natural for him to eventually inherit this house, the property, and his dad's company? And I'll be living as the elegant wife of the CEO in this mansion," Jane argued. Despite her confidence, Jane seemed panicked. I couldn't help but burst out laughing again. The fact that she assumed Bob would automatically inherit the mansion and become the CEO of the company his father ran was astonishing. Such naive thinking. I thought to myself. Given Jane's strong belief, Bob probably also thought he would inherit both the mansion and the company, even though no one had ever promised him that. Once more, I couldn't help but laugh at Jane's words. "Bob is the boss, and you're his wife? How can you even think that's possible? You both started at the company without any special training or education to run it," I chuckled. Jane seemed surprised by my teasing. She shot back, "Well, I might inherit the company from my uncle then." I laughed even harder. "You should check the company news first. And about my uncle's business, his cousin's son is already running it." "What? So Bob can't be CEO, and I can't be a CEO's wife?" Jane couldn't believe it. "That's right. Can I hang up now?" "I don't think I need to talk to strangers anymore," I said. "Please, Catherine, wait. Can you give us some money?" Jane pleaded. I hung up the call, but later I heard what happened next from Uncle. Bob and Jane didn't want to leave the mansion. They clung to the pillars and refused to go. Uncle had to come and pick them up. It turns out, since they were hired by Uncle's company, they were undergoing strict training, and they were so scared that they cried when Uncle took them away. They were taken to a mountain retreat owned by one of Uncle's friends because they were too unpredictable on their own. Uncle warned them that if they didn't behave at the retreat, they'd be stuck there forever. Despite this, they tried to escape multiple times but got caught every time. Meanwhile, the person who was supposed to manage the house was my fiancé, who's currently working abroad. I'm living in his parents' house now. He's planning to come back home this year, so we'll start planning our wedding soon. My mother and uncle who helped us will be invited to the wedding, but Bob and Jane won't be invited.